I already fear this is going to be a weird essay because I am going to do some live processing in this one. I don't really know what I think or feel on this subject yet, and have never really thought about it all that much, but this chapter just seemed to spark something in my mind that I found pretty interesting. So bear with me. To put it generally, this whole chapter, which is the Journey in the Dark chapter, felt strange to me. I know what happens in the mines of Moria. I've seen the movies. I know there are orcs. Actually, are they goblins? I think they're orcs. I know there are orcs in the mine, and I know that the Balrog lives there. But the resistance with which everyone in the Fellowship has against going into Moria was astonishing to me. I found it almost hysteria and mass panic. It felt like a conspiracy theory that switched to being true halfway through it. I don't know how to put it really, but stick with me here. And a real quick note, for those of you who don't know, I am reading through Lord of the Rings for the first time and publishing my thoughts in the form of video essays. I have been absolutely loving this read so far. And I cannot wait to keep reading and writing every single day. I am going to make my way through all of Tolkien's lore here, and I'm sure that will take me a few months to years. But I am going to make my way through some other books like Harry Potter, which I love and have read multiple times, and Brandon Sanderson, and even watch some Star Wars and some other nerd stuff live as it happens. So if you're into that sort of thing, make sure you subscribe because that will help keep the videos coming. And if you want to support this channel in any way, you can become a member, or I think you can just donate per video too. You don't have to, but you can subscribe or become a member. When we have enough members who are Lord of the Rings nerds, I'd like to start a book club. In our Discord, we have a bunch of readers who already started a book club. They do like one a month and they're reading some really great books. But anyway, make sure you like the video and subscribe. And if you want to become a member, that would be amazing. Anyway, I think there is more in Middle-earth that has to be passed down to legend and lore. They don't have news or like a Twitter feed or anything. And the sad thing is that we are just as susceptible, if not more, to what was happening in this chapter. But I don't think anyone in the entire company has been in Moria except for two. Gandalf definitely has, and so has Aragorn. But I don't think any of the others have been there. Even Gimli. And even Aragorn hasn't been in there in a few years, same with Gandalf. Maybe this is because there are far greater dangers in Middle-earth than in normal Earth. But why hasn't this legend passed into myth and into things that are unknown yet? Again, live processing this year, I kind of know why. There have been dwarves who have attempted to come back and recolonize it. I guess that would be the word, and no word has come from them yet. But while reading this chapter, I couldn't help thinking of the whole idea of Mandalore in Star Wars. My Star Wars lore isn't anywhere near where it should be, but I love the idea of this planet, where the Mandalorians dwelt. But it's now so cursed and so poisoned that no one dares to go there anymore. But little do they know that there is life on this planet, that a mythosaur still exists there. It's dangerous, but is it worth it for the Mandalorians to go back and reclaim their homeland? I think yes. Again, I think this may be because the Balrog is almost too fearsome a foe, but it's your homeland. Dwarves stormed Erebor looking to take it back from Smaug. Why haven't a whole host of them stormed Moria looking to take it back from, I guess, the Balrog? But do they know the Balrog still is there? Again, live processing, but it feels to me like dwarves don't like to do that much. And again, maybe the dwarves that went off with Bilbo were the exception to that rule. I could imagine Dane with all the dwarves of the Iron Hills storming into Moria again to reclaim their homeland because this place is incredible and immense and it might be worth reclaiming. But anyway, I don't know enough about the mentality and people and races in Middle-earth. And weirdly, I find myself craving that right now. Like, I want to know the culture of the dwarves and why the elves seem so ethereal. And I think Tolkien has written more about this in other books, but in the beginning of this chapter, the whole company is deciding whether or not they want to go through Moria. And essentially, Gandalf is the only one who thinks it would be good, and Gimli is with him because he's a dwarf. This is where my question came into play. Gandalf has been in the mines. He knows they are dangerous, but he also knows they might be a smidge safer than any other passage. And Gandalf, having been to the mines, cannot convince the rest of the group to trust him. Why? Because I think of mass hysteria. And okay, it's gonna be weird too because mass hysteria proves correct. But even in Hobbiton, they have heard rumors of what has happened in Moria and they don't want to touch the walls of Moria with a 10-foot spear. The book says this: "The road that I speak of leads to the mines of Moria," said Gandalf. Only Gimli lifted up his head. A smoldering fire was in his eyes. On all the others, dread fell at the mention of that name. Even to the hobbits, it was a legend of vague fear. First off, there's an essay coming about Gimli. This singing dwarf is fantastic, and I love him so much more than his movie counterpart. And I think Gimli in the movies is my favorite of the whole Fellowship too. So book Gimli is just fantastic. And side note too, I find that my power rankings and who my favorite of the Fellowship is flip-flops throughout my whole reading. Every chapter I find myself loving a certain character over the others. But anyway, even the hobbits feared what was in Moria, not because they had been there, but because of legend. And legend is legend for a reason. But would you not want to at least peek in the door to see how the air smells to test the legend for yourself? Here you have Gandalf, who again has been there before. And he is in a little battle against Aragorn, who has also been there but wants nothing to do with it. This is where the logic of the company gets hysteric and wrong. Boromir speaks up and says, "In that case, to enter Moria would be to walk into a trap, hardly better than knocking at the gates of the Dark Tower itself. The name of Moria is black. You speak of what you do not know when you liken Moria to the stronghold of Sauron," answered Gandalf. "I alone of you have ever been in the dungeons of the Dark Lord," which that needs a story. That needs fleshing out because holy smokes. Anyway, and only in his older and lesser dwelling in Dol Guldur. That is a tongue twister, holy smokes. "Those who pass the gates of Barad-dûr do not return. But I would not lead you into Moria if there were no hope of coming out again. If there are orcs, it may prove ill for us, that is true. But most of the orcs of the Misty Mountains were scattered or destroyed in the Battle of the Five Armies. The eagles report that orcs are gathering again from afar. But there is hope that Moria is still free." For what Gandalf says here, there are two things that I thought of. The first is that there seems to be no pretense of hidden meaning that a Balrog, Durin's Bane, still dwells there. Maybe the Balrog has gone into his chambers again and just wants to be left alone. Or maybe Gandalf knows about this but isn't really telling the group. And their main fear is the orcs that may be in Moria rather than a larger threat. But they are all sitting there in front of someone who has been to Moria before and is saying that this is definitely the best pass through the mountains. And they're all telling him, "Nah, you don't know what you're talking about. Moria is black. Legend has that nothing comes out of there." I know fear like this. And the whole time I was writing this essay, I kept trying to think of the way to word it. But then Gandalf said the exact word and exactly what I was thinking in a later passage when he said, "The orcs have often plundered Moria. There is nothing left in the upper halls, and since the dwarves fled, no one dares to seek the shafts and treasuries down in the deep places. They are drowned in water, or in a shadow of fear." The shadow of fear is the perfect way to put it. This might not be legitimate at all, but just because this shadow of fear has fallen over the group, they refuse to even consider going in there. Which shows how much power there is behind mass hysteria events like this. How much power there is to tales that people tell because, unfortunately, they turn out to be right. And this is the flipped point in my head with this essay, in that the whole company were essentially conspiracy theorists without any real evidence. None of the company, except for maybe Aragorn, had any evidence that Moria was cursed or black. They just heard about it from other people. Legend and rumor and gossip has such a tendency to crush people. I think about this a lot in terms of Harry Potter because in book 5 there are essentially a few people, namely the Order of the Phoenix, who are considered to be radical conspiracy theorists and nutters. They believe that the Dark Lord has risen again, just as Harry said, but the rest of the world doesn't really believe it. And by the end of the book, this flip-flops and the whole world comes to believe that Harry is right because they see it with their own eyes. It's a really weird point in this, but it goes to say for me that conspiracy theorists are somewhat good for the world, and that we need a few oddballs and outside-the-box thinkers to look at the world in a different way. Because ultimately, you don't fully know if that conspiracy theorist might be right. And I'm sorry if you're a flat earther, because I feel like some conspiracy theorists are just way out there without any evidence. But if you don't have any evidence and you are believing something based on the no evidence that you have, that seems wrong, and that seems like what this is talking about. So for me, I feel like there's a small swath of the world that are conspiracy theorists, and I think that's actually really healthy for society, and I think that's really good for society. Anyway, here in Lord of the Rings, the conspiracy theorist in Gandalf turns out to be the one who was wrong. But I still love his hope in this chapter, and still love that he thinks Moria might be free. Even though I'm kind of convinced in this moment that Gandalf knows about the Balrog and how rotten Moria really is, I think he is offering up this last glimmer of hope for the company here so that they take the road that gives them the best chance. Anything by the Gap of Rohan, and I am sure that the ring would fall to Saruman's hands. And sheesh, I have to say too, guys, your comments on that Saruman video I made a few days ago were so interesting to me. Saruman potentially overthrowing Sauron if he obtains the ring was something that blew my mind. So Gandalf knows that Saruman would likely get the ring if they brought it via that route. And they can't pass over Caradhras. Hold on, wait. Caradhras. I've heard it pronounced with a TH rather than a D. I'm butchering my pronunciations. My pronunciations suck in this thing. But anyway, as I've heard, they can't pass over that because they will for sure die. But this rumor becomes confirmed when they travel through Moria, and it's just so dark and terrifying and ominous. But there's another note here in a smaller hysteria that's forming in the mind of Frodo. Again, I don't know for sure, but I'm 99% sure that this is actually Gollum chasing them, and Frodo's actually able to hear it. Which, how Gollum got into the Misty Mountains after that passage closed because of the water snake thing, I will never know. But if there are any theories on that, please let me know. Maybe he came in the other way because this is the first time they hear Gollum, so maybe he was just waiting in the Mines of Moria for them. Because this is what the text says about Frodo hearing these steps. The company behind them spoke seldom, and then only in hurried whispers. There was no sound but the sound of their own feet, the dull stump of Gimli's dwarf boots, the heavy tread of Boromir, the light steps of Legolas, the soft, scarce-heard patter of hobbit feet, and in the rear, slow, firm footfalls of Aragorn with his long stride. When they halted for a moment, they heard nothing at all, unless it were occasionally a faint trickle and a drip of unseen water. Yet Frodo began to hear, or imagine that he heard, something else, like the faint falls of soft bare feet. It was never loud enough, or near enough, for him to feel certain that he heard it. But once it had started, it never stopped while the company was moving. But it was not an echo, for when they halted, it pattered on for a little all by itself, and then grew still. It's like a small little thing in Frodo's mind that seems to be driving him crazy. Because in the paragraph above, which was wild to me, Frodo can see things in the dark better than others, maybe except for Gandalf, because he says of the Morgul wound that, stabbed him. It's like he flirted between life and death when he had that wound, and while life won, he still took a few tricks from death. That paragraph was insane to me. Anyway, Frodo has this growing threat in his mind, the shadow of fear. He has no name for it yet, and doesn't tell it to anyone else in the company because he doesn't yet know if he's mad. But this conspiracy brewing in his head seems right and correct, assuming that this is Gollum. And again, I don't really have the words to figure out this part because this has just been a live processing essay, and writing makes an exact person, so I figured I'd just start writing to see if I could figure it out. But that little phrase that Gandalf said just stuck with me. The shadow of fear. And I find that it's paralyzing in society today too. People tend to not fear things that are real sometimes, but just the shadow of fear. Just a hint or rumor or bit of gossip that something could go wrong, or something could be wrong. And while in this book it's actually confirmed that the rumor and legend is correct and Moria is a terrifying place, maybe what Gandalf did here was to give the ability to truly free Moria from the grips of the Balrog. Maybe dwarves will come to live here again in time. But I do love a story that has the shadow of fear to be a lie. Like in The Mandalorian. Or like in Harry Potter. And even though Moria may be black and cursed, I still think I would want to visit. And it's one of my favorite sections of the whole movie. In the Dwarven section with the ascending music. Oh, it's so good. But incoming. Balrog in the next chapter. I'm guessing. Could you imagine if the Balrog wasn't in the books and they actually just made it up for the movie? I would be furious. Sheesh. Anyway, make sure you subscribe and like the video, and I'll see you in the next one.